Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Do not shoot Sasquatch. Please leave him in peace. It's not worth it. The fame is temporary, and slowly everyone's disgust with you for taking something magical away from the world will become overwhelming.
If I see a Squatch, I'll offer him booze and metal trinkets. Squatches love that shit.
Type 1 Bigfoots, Sasquatch, aliases, Oma, Skookumape, Bukwas, notable individuals, Patty of the Patterson-Gimlin film, height, 8 to 12 feet, toes, 5. Description: the most iconic of the Bigfoot types, the Type 1 or Patty type. Bigfoot is typically found along the west coast and northwest regions of North America, though they can be found sparsely throughout parts of lower 48. They have more human-like faces with square teeth and can get much taller than most other Bigfoot types. They're purportedly the least aggressive of all big feet, but still have the same hair-trigger temper if their food, habitat, or kin are threatened. Have been noted to dedicate while they walk, and are said to have matted feces on the hair covering their rear ends. Will cohabitat with the Type 2s, and to a lesser extent the Dogman cryptid, but will not tolerate any of the Type 3s. Type 2 Bigfoots. The Type 2 Bigfoot is more ape-like, with a far less human face and a much more simian dentition, boasting massive incisors. In addition to walking on their hind legs, they will also lope on all fours using their knuckles, similar to a great ape. More aggressive than the Type 1s, many Native American tribes cite them as being the more violent, cannibalistic of the major two types, Type 1 and Type 2, though some researchers believe the native peoples may have been citing Type 3s instead in these accounts. Will cohabitat with Type 1s and to a lesser extent the Dogman cryptid, but not the Type 3s. Booger. Aliases: Haint, No-Head, Yahoo, Catamount, etc. Notable individuals: Chicken Man, height 7 to 8 feet, toes 5. Description: arguably the most common subgroup of the Type 2s, they can be found all over much of North and Central America, though seem most common around the southeast and southern Midwest. Skunk Ape. Aliases: Florida Skunk Ape. Notable individuals: none. Height 6 to 7 feet, toes 4. Description: a smaller subvariety found through the marshlands of Florida and surrounding southern swamplands. They're virtually identical in appearance to the booger, save for their size and telltale four-toed footprints. Grassman. Aliases: Swamp Squatch, Navajo Howler. Notable individuals: Orange Eyes, Momo, Fook Monster, Monster of Boggy Creek. Height 7 or 8 feet, toes 3. Description: long shaggy hair covers much of the face and body, with much longer arms with elongated fingers. Many witnesses describe as claw-like and very odd three-toed footprints. The most aggressive of the Type 2 subgroups, the Grassman, is found in temperate woodlands around eastern Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia, while the Swamp Squatch tends to be found in marshy environments all throughout the southeast, white out west. In arid climates, we find the Navajo Howler. Type 3 Bigfoots, a classification covering some of the more bizarre Bigfoots. These are unique in that they possess claws instead of nails, and have much more notably carnivorous dentition with fan-like canines, and even less human-looking faces than the Type 2s. They're believed to be obligate carnivores dwelling further up north, having most likely been driven out of much of the lower 48 by the native peoples and European settlers, though they can still be found all throughout North America in various geographical pockets. Aliases: Genosqua, southern variant. Notable individuals: none. Height 8 to 10 feet, toes 5. Description: for all intents and purposes, a larger variation of the Type 2 with fangs and claws, the Wendigo range from northern Canada to Wyoming and Montana. Gugwe. Aliases: Type 3 Dogman, Bearman, Bear Squatch. Notable individuals: Beast of 7 Shoots, Beast at land between the lakes. Height 8 to 10 feet, toes 5. Description: boasting a curious baboon-like muzzle, pointed ears, and a uniquely gorilla-like physique, the Gugwe are often called dogmen, or Type 3 dogmen, though they're not to be confused with the canine cryptid of the same name. Claimed by natives to be solitary hunters preferring higher elevations, they will, in colder climates, purportedly wear animal skins as primitive clothing. Found predominantly in eastern Canada, New England, and along parts of the Mississippi River. Mountain giant. Aliases. True giants. Height, 13 to 19 feet. Toes, 4. Description. The most enigmatic of all the Type 3 subtypes, these giants are only found far up north, and are said to have a far more human-like physique with claws and fangs, much like the other Type 3s, but with predominant lower canines visible as tusks. They're also often described as wielding clubs or tree branches as bludgeons, and are fiercely aggressive towards humans. May have been the origin of our myths about ogres and such. Type 4 Bigfoot, aliases unknown, notable individuals, Sykesville monster, height 5 to 7 feet, toes 5, description, possibly not even a Bigfoot at all. This variety may actually be a relic hominid or primitive human. Found only in regions of the Northwest, these creatures may be one and the same with the Russian almasty. Very little evidence or information exists about them.
One of the truly exquisite things about living in the high desert is the night sky. Most nights of the year, where I am at nearly 7,000 feet, it is like black velvet with diamonds tossed across it. The stars are bright, big, and beautiful. Immediately after moving, one of my favorite things, even in the miserable cold of winter, was walking the dog, very late, after midnight. It was like the night sky was there, for a special display, just for walking the dog. It all began during the winter of 2000, late at night, maybe 2:30 a.m. or so. The first time I heard something strange, it was a loud huffing and puffing, like someone breathing in and out, loudly. It sounded like cows I've heard, but louder and a bit stranger. Having been on the outs with an on-again, off-again fiancé who could be a total jerk at times, I wondered if he had been prowling around. I mentioned it to him a few days later. He started making a noise that was similar, but not the same. About a week later, about the same time, I was terrorized by the scratching of 2 raccoons at my bedroom window. My bedroom window is a double window and level with the ground. Making myself go look, I peeked through the blinds. The 2 creatures were terrified, clawing the glass, trying to get inside, like they were trying to get away from something. There was nothing I could do. I went back to bed, terrified. A few minutes later, they were no longer at the window. I heard them scream horribly. Then there was silence. Raccoons never again prowled around my window. We had numerous feral cats. Once in a while at night, there would be this blood-curdling scream, then silence. For years in the evenings, around dusk, I'd pull into my carport and have this feeling of something not quite right. I was almost afraid. There were evenings when I would rush to unload my car and get inside before dark. It was a creepy feeling, like something was watching me. Something or someone would prowl around my carport. I swear everyone in the neighborhood was feeding feral cats. This would lead to skunks sneaking in for dry cat food. Skunks and cats get along quite well. I learned during this time that you could rarely smell one of the skunks unless they sprayed, which happened rather frequently. I would leave a can of wet food outside for a family of cats I was feeding. The cat food would be put on 6-inch styrofoam plates. If I did not get them picked up on a regular basis, I would go outside to find the plates arranged in a formation, quite often in a perfectly straight line. It was obvious someone was prowling around the carport. At that time, I did not have a close neighbor, which was also a bit creepy. I quit taking the dog outside for evening walks rather than switching to pee pads. Night was weird. A friend set up security lights for me. They lasted about a month or so. I would see them flash on through the peephole in my front door. I'd go look and nothing would be outside, maybe a fleeting shadow of a person, but that was it. This went on for years. There were times when I felt almost under siege. In 2005, my older dog died and was replaced by an obnoxious yapping puppy. He would rush into my entry, lunge at the door, and bark hysterically. I'd turn the outside light on and see nothing. That was the problem, nothing. Something was outside, prowling. By this time, we knew there was a mountain lion who resided nearby. There were numerous deer. Bear would amble through on a regular basis. There would be raccoons, but they were never around back, just the carport. There was something of a pecking order. The feral cats would eat, then share with the skunks. Raccoon would come in later in the evening. By morning, nothing would be left of the cat food. Around this time, I enlarged my front entry and added a larger peephole. I also had a glass storm door put in front of my new front door. I never locked the storm door. Things continued on and off for another 5 years or so. Then one night late, the dog lunged at the front door. By this time, he would sometimes bark, but not often. I went to check on it, not turning on the light in the entry. I could hear the storm door open and saw the handle on my front door move. Terrified, I checked the peephole, which was now dark. Something, the palm of a hand, was over it. The following evening, I started locking the storm door. A few nights after that, the dog lunged at the door. By the time I turned on the outside light, nothing was there. The following morning, I discovered that something had peed all over the storm door, starting at the halfway point of the door. The door was about 8 inches off the ground, with a 3-inch step up into my home. The bottom half of the door was at least 5 feet off the carport floor. The pee had dripped down all over the glass. I was told that it had to be one huge dog to pee that high. In 2004, there were numerous Bigfoot reports on the Mescalero Reservation, several along Carrizo Canyon, which is not that far from where I live. Like everyone else, I found it fascinating. It turned out that one of the girls who was peeped is a friend of a friend's daughter, in the same class at school with her. No one wanted to talk about it. That seems to be a theme around Lincoln County. No one wants to talk about it. I'd read the Lincoln County report and tried to talk to someone involved in it. Forget that. I knew there were Bigfoot in the area, but that was it. I also had given up walking the dog outside at night. It was too spooky. Just the knowledge that lions and bears, oh my, were prowling within attacking distance was enough to keep me indoors. Adding the fact that something else might be out there, and I don't even like opening the front door, even though the storm door is locked. I do not want to see what's out there. There comes a time when a person becomes just plain old paranoid. You know something is going on outside. You can feel it, but it doesn't make sense. It isn't all the time either. Just some evenings, something doesn't feel right. I began noticing about 4 years ago that my weird feelings were often accompanied by a brief whiff of eau de mephitis. But unlike the normal emission from the southbound side of a northbound creature, this odor did not linger. It would come and go fairly quickly. It was also not all-encompassing and strong. Anyone who has ever had the misfortune of having their bedroom windows anointed by such an odor knows how nauseating it can be, and how it will linger. Instead, it was more an earthy version, rather like a bit of wet dog along with skunk odor. Even stranger is that the odor moved. I could smell it at one part of my home, then another. The odor would be in the front, the carport, then a few minutes later, it would be under the balcony doors where I sit and write. Some nights it would be outside my bedroom. I reached the point where I was so spooked that I would stay up, working most of the night. I'm a night owl anyway, so it wasn't much of a sacrifice. My brain doesn't function before noon. Unless I'm working on very annoying edits and layout, I work better after midnight. I noticed when I would go to bed and turn off the lights, I could hear something outside. The dog would bristle a little. I started leaving the television on all night. Then I started leaving the bedroom lights on all night. Last week I went to bed a little early, around 2:30. When I turned off the kitchen lights, the dogs, small, ran to the front door and growled. They then ran downstairs and growled. On the level of my guest room, they looked out the window, growling. I thought about leaving a light on in that room, but did not. I also noticed a slight skunk odor. Tired, I just left the lights on in my bedroom, along with the television. Not long after putting the weird feelings and the odor together, I told myself I was losing my mind. The area had experienced a major wildfire, with the mountains surrounding me being burned nearly to a crisp. I was talking to a friend who lives elsewhere. She told me that one of her children told her about the big brown Easter bunny who stood up while their car was driving past. The person was about 5 at the time. She was forever terrified of the big brown Easter bunny. Finally, she told her mother, 30 years later, what the big brown Easter bunny really was. My friend told me to face reality. I started watching the burned-out mountainside, having seen something charcoal color blending in with the remaining pinyon trees. Then it would move. It was winter bears hibernate in the winter. I'd go to take photographs, but by then it was no longer there. I've since photographed the entire area for comparison photos. I faced the fact that we were dealing with a Bigfoot. Around that time, a friend was telling me about the huge bear which was dumpster diving. They decided to get a photo of the bear and would leave fruit on a patio table. The bananas would be peeled, eaten, with the peel remaining on the table. The apple cores would remain. Bears don't do that. Finally, I asked a neighbor if she had noticed anything. She wanted to know just what. I told her. She told me she thought she was crazy but knew what she had seen. A good 10 years earlier, while driving to Alamogordo on Highway 70, at Apache Summit, a Bigfoot ran out in front of her car. Both she and her daughter saw it. Apache Summit has a weird feeling to it. There's something eerie, almost unworldly when you drive through it, rather like the forest primeval. It is quiet, almost silent. I have since learned that numerous individuals have had the same Bigfoot experience there. As usual, no one will talk about it. My friend told me while walking her dog at night she would feel things and notice the skunk odor. One evening, she saw our visitor walking around the equestrian states. She was less than a block away from it, with her young dog starting to go a little crazy. By the time she was back by her front door, it was halfway across the lot, walking toward her. That was her second experience seeing something in that area. She no longer walks her dogs at night. We finally admitted what was going on, discussing other incidents. She too felt strange at night. I told her I swore I had seen things moving in my carport. She told me she swore she had seen things moving in my carport. Always just a big dark shadow that disappeared quickly. She also limits her nighttime comings and goings. Another friend has noticed something prowling around her home. When I told her what we thought it was, her answer was, "Oh shit, I was avoiding that." She too has noticed the specific odor and had that creepy feeling. Her dogs do the same thing. Last summer, my sister was driving me home. I was telling her about it. Her boyfriend likes to track, has found footprints, things like that, elsewhere. I told her the night before while we were outside talking at another location, you could tell when they were around, the feeling. She noticed it. She noticed it later in the evening after I had left. When we reached my home, she noticed it as soon as I did. The next day, I told my friend about it. She said right before I drove up, our friend had been in her carport, rattling her front door to make the dogs bark. She has a large security screen door metal. Her front door was open for air. She could smell him. Somehow, I ended up in a conversation about it at a friend's office. His secretary, who had once worked for dispatch for several municipalities, told me the majority of the 911 calls in our area at night are to report Bigfoot activity. She had worked up in Washington in a rural county as dispatch. Several of the calls she took about Bigfoot have been uploaded to YouTube. Our friend is quite tall. The only time I've ever seen anything of him is when I was looking out my living room window. I saw a tall shadow moving. That's all I want to see of him. He is a dark umber, which is why he blends with the charred pinyon and cedar on the mountain. And I was told people see him up there. She told me that a lighter-colored mother and baby had been seen at the dumpsters near our local Walgreens. There's another, which is to roam around the ski area. The woman was telling me about a local residence where they are constantly pelted with sticks and stones. Someone I know, who lives near the river, recently told me that one comes up and slams the side of her double-wide, periodically. I know someone who has his family property surrounded by game cams looking for one. At least I know I'm not out of my mind, that other people have had the same experiences. No one wants to talk about it. What I do know is that the game is plentiful. This area has so many deer they are becoming a nuisance. The herds of elk are growing. There is water, there are places to hide. Just don't expect me to go out looking for it.
Sorry, OP, but no can do. If Bigfoot walks out in front of me in the woods while I have a gun, I'm taking the shot and he's getting a soft point in the chest.
My grandpa remembered a time in the mid-70s in the Willamette Valley in Oregon when he was out driving in the early morning. He would finish his job and head to an overlook and watch the sunrise nearby every morning. One time, and the last time he did it, he felt a rumbling about 10 minutes after he parked his car. The birds in the area went silent, and he smelled something rather awful approaching him from his 6 o'clock. A giant ape-like creature with dark red and brown, greasy-looking fur was suddenly by his car. It was around 8 feet tall and could move greater distances than a human because of its height. It stopped, glanced at my grandpa's car, and then moved on into some nearby trees. My grandpa noticed it had a limp in one leg and was reliant on the other one to move its body to where it wanted to go. After it went away, the birds started chirping again, and he BTFO from there as he was obviously freaked out. He saw Bigfoot. In the local paper, he claimed later to me and my dad that a local woman around the same time claimed she had a hit and run with a Bigfoot. She hit it. It damaged her car, and she noticed one of its legs were injured by the collision. It got up and limped away from the accident site. My grandpa didn't tell anybody for 20 years about this in fear of being put in a lunatic asylum. I think if they were real, the government took them out to both make the environment safer for humans and to collect them for research purposes. They possibly kept this secret, as the Sasquatch is an intelligent species, and it would be seen as a cruelty to kill and illegally exploit a cousin of the human family.
In 1992, my uncle owned about 150 acres in a remote area of East Tennessee. On this land, he had a large fishing pond and a stream running through it, and he used to leave lines out at night to pull in big catfish. This pond was accessible by 2 small game trails through thick patches of woods, and he would need to drive to the trail entrances from his house near the front of the property and walk about a half-mile in with his gear and nothing but a headlamp for light. This was something he did pretty often, and my uncle was a lover of the outdoors, so this was business as usual for him. Vietnam vet as well. Anyway, this particular night in July 1992, he went down to the pond at about 9:30 p.m. to check his lines. As he was doing so, he heard a loud splash and assumed it was a fish jumping. He carried on with what he was doing, and then heard a low, guttural groan and what he described as monkeys flighting just on the other side of the pond. It was about 70 yards across. Multiple loud splashes occurred, and he also heard a loud crash in the woods just yards away to his left. He talked about how he immediately felt a sense of panic and was attempting to get visuals using his headlamp, but whatever was producing these sounds was behind tree cover. He said that the woods then erupted in continued sounds of fighting monkeys, and he opted to drop his gear and run down the trail toward his truck. Apparently, even in his adrenaline-fueled state, he could hear footfall on his left as he was being hunted. He got to his truck and hauled his butt out of there to the road and back to his home, which, mind you, sits on the property about 6 miles away. He went inside and locked every window and door, grabbed a gun, and stayed up and vigilant the entire night, but nothing more occurred. He called my dad the next day, who sort of just laughed it off. Well, for my uncle, whatever he experienced scared him so badly that he put his land up for sale and sold it a few months later. Until he died in 2017, he maintained that he believed that he walked into a group of Sasquatch and they erupted in territorial displays to get him out of there. He never enjoyed the outdoors after that. This wasn't a man who I took for a liar.
Indigenous reports describe them as man-eaters, but there may be entanglement with different entities who are alike with the Bigfoot, for example, mountain giants. All we have to go on there is stories passed down. I speculate that the majority of what we know of as Bigfoot, skunk ape, Sasquatch, or wild man at some point stopped viewing humans as a food source, or they were 2 different creatures to begin with. The juveniles tend to be the ones most likely to meddle in our affairs, chasing down pets and livestock, in rebellion against their parents' wishes to never go near our lands. Although I think, like orcas, their culture is highly localised, and each group has their own law, rules and customs. It isn't unheard of that folks have befriended entire families of the creatures in rarer cases. They are just as conscious and intelligent as we are, if not more so because they are untainted by the folly of the artificial. It is for this reason I believe their technology is primarily natural magic. not unlike what our pagan ancestors had, telepathy, illusion, and the like. They are in many ways wiser than we, and so I hope we never truly discover them. They are pure beings. I can't stand to think about man corrupting them, as he has so much else.
There was a really weird occurrence at my dad's house a few years ago. He awoke to the sound of dogs barking and realized the neighborhood dogs were barking at something that was moving parallel to the road. When his own dog started to bark, he went outside to see what was up. Across the street is pretty much all forest except a church directly across the street that at the time was just a gravel lot. My dad was too far away to see anything but in the dead of night. He could definitely hear the sound of someone running at full tilt across the gravel. A few things freaked him out of this. Whatever it was definitely ran on 2 feet. Try having a dog run on gravel versus a human, and you can tell the difference. And it was big. Both myself and I have witnessed large animals like bears and moose running through the underbrush, and according to him, it sounded like it was of a similar size to those creatures. It was easily running somewhere around 40 to 50 miles per hour in the clearing of the lot, then slowed down again as it went back into the woods. He was able to compare the speed because the road itself has a 45-mile speed limit, so it was going just as fast as a passing car. The final thing, its huffing and gasping was so loud he could hear it from his front door and was obviously not human. We looked online later to compare its sound to other animals, and it really didn't sound like anything he'd ever heard before. The freakiest part was the almost synchronous reactions the dogs had. He'd never heard dogs react like that before. Both he, my stepmom, my stepbrother, and several of our neighbors can account for hearing the strange barking from the dogs. But it was only my dad who heard what they were after. Nothing happened like that since, and I've never personally witnessed anything like it. We do like right on the border of the Cascade Mountain Range and are surrounded by park and federal land if you want to get an idea of where this took place.
Sasquatch are actually just phantoms of an ancient split off of humanity from tens of thousands of years ago. Almost every Native American tribe across all of North America have similar myths of wild men covered in fur who either abandoned tribal life to become feral or were always feral. Some myths think they are spiritual entities, or to become a wild man you had to be cursed. This part can't be denied. They literally all share the same myths. Anyway, outside of these myths, these wild men are actually just an evolutionary branch off from humanity. Some tribal peoples, in the most literal way, reverted to monkey. They grew entire bodies worth of hair to not freeze during winter. Their speech and higher intelligence degenerated to make way for better hunting and survival instincts. They grew large muscles and tall bodies from a high-protein diet. If you believe in ghosts, sightings of Bigfoot are just that. Ghosts. Just like how people can see ghost animals, it can also be hallucinations from genetic memory. Of course, some people lie about sightings, and actual proof of a living Bigfoot is all bullshit. They either died out from climate change and/or the native tribes exterminated them all. Native American tribes were already proven to have driven dozens of animals extinct.
This takes place in 1999. 3 of my friends were out hunting near Cody, Wyoming. Me and my friends were more like traditionalists. We try to preserve the style of hunting back to the mountain man style. So we have done a lot of research into clothing and weapon use, all that. Well, we were up at a friend's ranch up there mule deer hunting in the old traditional style. Well, we were up there, and we had shot a mule deer. We'd been there for about 2 weeks. We had pack horses, and we were cutting this mule deer up to put it on the pack horses, and then all of a sudden there was what I thought at the time was this animal coming near us. It was kind of growling and snarling, kind of baring its teeth. I told my friend, let's go with what we got on the horses and leave the rest. So we went back to our base camp. Later that night, I heard rustling in the leaves. I told my friends, well, the bears are trying to get to the meat. Let's reposition it. And we do. We didn't really notice anything. I got up the next morning and I said, did you notice something odd about that animal yesterday? And they just kind of said that they really hadn't seen anything like that, but were really not from this area of the country, so they figured it was something native to this area. So we went out again, scouting for more mule deer. I later came back. A friend and I came back early. I heard some rustling again and I said, bears are after the meat again, so let's sneak up real quiet and see if we can catch it and scare it off. So we sneak up to it, and there's this, it looked like a guy in a, have you ever seen the old pictures of the Indians or the mountain men with the big buffalo capes around them? It kind of looked like that. But it was not quite. I mean, the hair was long. I was like, what in the world is this? So we sat there and watched it. I now know it was Bigfoot, but at the time it didn't register, you know? We're watching it going through our packs and stuff like that. Our packs are the old basket-style packs, you know? The basket frame, wood, metal. Let me tell you, they're killer on the shoulders. Anyway, he's just really intrigued. I don't know if it was a he or a she, but it was really intriguing. I finally said, I don't like this. Let's real nonchalantly walk up and see if we can spook it away. So we just start walking like normal, and sure enough, it runs away and we're a little spooked. Later that day, we're eating lunch, and we noticed the same thing as camped across the creek that we're camped at. I said, boys, look at that. And we sat there and watched it, and he watched us. And it probably seemed like forever, but it was probably like 30 minutes. I said, I wonder what that is. It acts too human-like to be an animal. And we start pondering and talking about it. One guy mentioned Bigfoot, and we all kind of laughed about it. Then, it was the oddest thing. On the last day, we were packing up our meat, and this thing was across the creek again, watching us pack up. I said, I wonder if that's someone that's just been left out here. You know, a hermit type. So I laid a hind quarter of one of the deer out at the center of the camp, and I said, let's go. So we acted like we were going. I said, now let's double back and see. The Bigfoot had come across the creek and was eating a little bit the leg of the deer. Then it took it and walked back across the creek and down over the ridge. It was about the weirdest thing I've ever seen.
About 7 years ago, I was hiking up in the Cascades in Oregon. I was in a more remote area of the range. On the 6th day on the trail, the hair on the back of my neck started standing up. I chalked it up to being a mountain lion in the area. But the weird thing was, the uneasy feeling never left. That night is when I heard the howling. It wasn't wolves or bears or any other animal I had ever heard. The closest thing I could relate it to is the noises apes and monkeys make. This persisted for the next few nights, and eventually, something started rummaging through my campsite. Naturally, I assumed it was a bear or raccoon. But then on the 11th day, I woke up and my food bag was removed from the tree. Something had cut the line through. All my food was gone. I decided to keep pushing. I had 4 days left till the trail's end. I'm familiar with what I can and can't eat in the area and could always fish for food. The same nightly activities occurred, and on the 13th night, something started throwing rocks at my tent. For some reason, I lost it. I screamed into the darkness for whatever it was to leave me alone, hoping it was just some person screwing with me. Instead, it grew quiet for the first time in nights. Nothing could be heard. Then a scream louder and more vicious than any other night cut through the night. Then nothing, complete and utter silence again. Despite it being quiet, I wasn't able to sleep that night. I just waited. The next day, I continued my hike, dead tired, just wanting to get out. The hair on the back of my neck was still standing, and the forest was still quiet. I felt like I was being hunted. Towards the end of the day, I sat down to rest before pushing a few more miles when I saw it. Something tall and large, bigger than any man or animal I had seen, sliding through the forest, not making a noise. I yelled at it, and it turned to look at me. I never got a good look at it through the trees and the brush, and it was dark, but I knew that whatever it was causing this. I threw a rock at it and then pulled my knife. This thing just kept staring at me. I don't know what kicked in, but I no longer felt scared. I felt angry, and I ran at the thing. It ran from me, and I chased it in the woods. It had long strides and easily outpaced me, but I continued the chase. After several minutes, I gave up and collapsed in exhaustion. I rested for a bit before backtracking my way back to my backpack and resting area. I was tired and made camp there. Another night of silence when I woke up the next day and had about 10 miles till I was out. Exhausted, hungry, and mentally drained, I made my way out. As I got closer and closer to the end of the trail, the typical forest noises returned, birds, bugs, and mice running through the undergrowth. All these noises slowly returned. I no longer had this feeling of unease. I got to the trail end, sat in my car, and broke down. To this day, I still pass it off as someone just screwing with me. But the way that thing moved in the forest, I just don't know. I told a park ranger about it, and he jokingly said they have a bunch of Bigfoot sightings in the area, but most likely it was a local messing with me or my own imagination. I do a lot of long hikes, but that 15 days was by far the worst.
They are interdimensional because they have psilocybin in their dimension that has, over the course of their evolution, opened their pineal gland to the degree at which the mushroom trips now allow them to essentially astral project into other dimensions. This is why they seemingly appear and disappear, as well as why we've never found bones. They are here on a pataphysical level, tangible without being totally physical. Their minds, as a result of these psychedelic experiences, have evolved to the limits of what their ape-like physical being can bear. This is why they still grunt and throw things in territorial tantrums, but their consciousness understands more than what they appear. Once the trip wears off, they are returned to their dimension. It's a hassle for higher plane interdimensional beings that try to keep them relegated to their dimension to avoid interdimensional contacts. This is why Bigfoot sightings are often accompanied by UFOs.
I had a childhood friend, Johnny, whom I'd sometimes play with. We weren't the closest, but we were part of the same church, so occasionally spent time at each other's houses. He lived outside of town, in a large house that sat near the woods. This wasn't at all strange to me, as many of my friends at the time, if not most, lived in similar circumstances. So it naturally became standard to play outside, hiking around the property, the woods, the large field in front of the house, wherever. Johnny had a little brother, Steven, who'd sometimes want to tag along. Frankly, I don't really remember much of how we'd play. Pretend, mostly, I'd assume. This was the early 1990s. None of us were from particularly well-off families, and imagination was dirt cheap. You know, sometimes I really wish I could write off what I saw as imagination. It'd be easier. This happened during one summer all those years ago. Johnny, Steven, and I were doing our usual, walking around, talking, playing pretend down at the bottom of one of the large fields that surrounded the house. I can remember how hot it was. The grasses around us had long since dried. There was a sour smell in the air from all the pungent weeds and shrubs surrounding us. The only things that remained green were the abundant brambles of blackberries that grew in huge, towering clusters off to one side of the property. I can remember there was this little rotting shack made of dilapidated boards down there, and that's where we were, playing right near it and the blackberries. I had wandered just a bit away from them. It couldn't have been more than 10 feet. That's when I glanced away and saw it. There was something in the blackberry bushes. I couldn't tell what it was, but I reacted as best as my childhood mind would allow me to, and ducked behind a nearby shrub out of fear. Now keep in mind, these blackberry bushes in front of me weren't small. Such clusters can often climb small trees and grow into a sort of wall of thorny bushes. These were probably anywhere from 8 to 10 feet high, and whatever this thing was, it towered over them by at least a couple of feet. I could see its whole upper torso, arms, and head. It had thick black fur. It was clearly standing on 2 legs, and at that second, looked like it was reaching for something. Now I'm sure at this second you're probably thinking, okay, so this person saw a bear eating berries as a kid. Really scary. But this thing wasn't a bear. I was raised near woods. I was young, but I'd seen plenty of animals. This thing wasn't a bear. Its shoulders, arms, and face looked very human-like, but it was distorted somehow, evil-looking. Frankly, the thought my young mind had at the time was demon. The thing that was most striking, though, were its eyes. They were red, stark, red, which I'm sure in text sounds cartoonish, but to a child, it might as well have been that death was right in front of me. And it did have that vibe. This thing was terrifying, and something inside me told me that if I didn't run right, then I might not make it. I bolted for the house, screaming for Johnny and Steven to run with me. They did, acting either on instinct at the sound of my voice or just playing along with the moment. At least I suspect Johnny was. Playing along, that is. Stephen, being younger, seemed to pick up on my fear and was screaming for real as we all booked it to the house. The wind was so intensely whipping by my ears that I couldn't really hear if the creature was in pursuit, but I dared not look back. Finally, we reached the safety of the house's deck and quickly ran inside. I tried to explain what happened to Johnny's parents, all about the demon I saw in the blackberry bushes. Of course, they treated me like a dumb kid. My parents seemed to be entertained that I saw something, but not that it was supernatural. I've spent my life casually trying to understand what happened. Every couple of years, the memory resurfaces like a reoccurring nightmare that never quite leaves you. The cynic in me insists that it was a bear or nothing, a figment of an overactive imagination. We did like to play pretend, after all, and it was very hot that day. Not to mention, clearly berries would explain the presence of a bear. But again, I knew the shape of a bear, and I've never heard of a hallucination that lasts a long time and can be viewed from multiple angles. I've dabbled in a little missing 411 information over the years, and there have been reports of certain cryptids that match. I forgot the name, and I just tried looking it up but couldn't find it. Apparently, there's a type of rumored Sasquatch that is larger than normal and is said to have red eyes and an inclination toward carnivorism and aggression. Apparently, the legend goes that they like to twist people's heads off. As for what I actually saw, I suppose I'll never know.
Years back, I drove out to Arkansas with a friend for work. Our boss was this really cool old Southern guy, and he told us if we wanted, we could drive up early and stay at his ranch. Said there was good fishing nearby, and he had four-wheelers and lots of beer in the fridge. Friend and I, of course, took him up on this, and we spent the first day just riding four-wheelers. Then we got shit-faced late into the night. Next day, we woke up late and decided to go fishing. By the time we got ready and ate and grabbed our stuff and went to the lake, it was 6 p.m. We were both hungover, but we weren't drunk. Anyway, we were out there fishing, and suddenly everything just went dead quiet. I could see the water moving, but I couldn't hear it. I turned to my friend, and I could tell it wasn't just me. It was like we were both afraid to speak because there wasn't any sound. Right at that moment, there was this huge gust picked up. I could feel it on my skin, and it whipped through my clothes, but I couldn't hear shit, even though I could feel it. So we're both just staring at each other, spooked, when we hear this big splash. It came from over to our right, and we both jumped and looked over. It wasn't Bigfoot. That's what people always think when I describe it. This thing was tall and hairy, but it was slim, almost lanky, but with big shoulders. And it was only like 20 feet away, maybe. It trudged really quickly through the water and up the bank and into the trees. Before we knew it, it was gone. It happened so fast I didn't even really get a good look at it. My friend said he noticed it had big hands, but honestly all I noticed was its height and build, and that it moved fast too.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more Greentexts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.